You're listening to Love and Libido with me, your host, Dr. Emily Jamia. The goal of this podcast is to educate and inspire. My hope is that you will learn tools to create connection and cultivate passion, both within yourself and in your relationships. Here's what's coming up on today's episode. Are you curious how to experience pleasure more completely on both an emotional and physical level? Maybe you're struggling to understand why emotional intimacy as a prerequisite to sex is so important for your partner. Do you long to feel more present and connected to your partner? Then you need to listen to today's episode. Today, I sit down with Dr. Nicole McNichols, a human sexuality professor at the University of Washington, where she teaches the most popular course in the university's history. Nicole and I chat about the role of emotional connection in sexual pleasure. We also give our 2 cents about how sex scenes are depicted in your favorite Netflix shows, how to navigate motherhood while staying connected to your sexuality, and even tell you what monkeys and dolphins can teach us about sexual pleasure. Let's get started. Welcome, everybody, to today's episode. I am so thrilled to welcome our guest. She and I were chatting before we started recording the episode, and we feel like we know each other because we follow each other so closely on social media. And so I definitely encourage everyone to go check out her page. So I'm joined today by Dr. Nicole McNichols. Dr. McNichols is a human sexuality professor at the University of Washington, where she teaches the largest, most popular course in the university's history. She is also a writer and speaker. Her work has been featured in a variety of sources, including Psychology Today, the Seattle Times, NPR, TEDx, The Conversation, and Teen Vogue. Welcome, Nicole.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I am not surprised at all that your class is the most popular one at the University of Washington, because as I was saying, I followed you for a long time now on Instagram, and you're obviously very informative, but your content is so engaging and entertaining as well. And I can see how it would be appealing to those college kids.
Thank you so much. I mean, I certainly try. It's, of course, like everything I present in my class is going to be backed by research, but there's also a human element to this, right? And
Totally.
The fact of the matter is I'm, married. I have 3 children. I dated my share of, relationships that were not really the best in my 20s. I've had a lot of experiences. So I try to kind of draw from that and present research, but also in a way where I'm really trying to help people. So
Right. And I think that's so key is, we're human at the end of the day. And I think, if we can get information across to people in a way that's also relatable, that's really the best thing to do.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. So today we are going to talk about pleasure. And I am so excited to dive into this topic because there's such a focus on desire. And obviously there's some overlap between the two. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about desire, but I don't think people talk enough about pleasure and satisfaction. So we're going to discuss that today. But before we do, I would like to hear a little bit about how you got into the field. And I know you have a background in psychology, but you have the human sexuality focus. So tell me what your story is.
So my story is I have had a very circuitous route to being a sex professor. And so my PhD is in social psychology. And my thesis was on motivation. And I really did not do research myself on human sexuality. However, I was a teaching assistant for my time in graduate school for the current course that I teach now that I've taken over. And it was through those years as a TA that, running different aspects of the course that basically I learned more about sex. As I like to say to people, most of my knowledge is self-taught, right?
Definitely.
So anyway, I had like a year or 2 off after graduate school, done some consulting work when I was, I had very young children, and kind of had this aha moment that I wanted to go back into academia in some capacity. And, had a conversation with my advisor who at the time I was applying for other jobs at different universities and asked him for a letter of recommendation, at which point he said, wait, why are you applying to other universities? Come teach here. It's like, okay, well, that's convenient.
Yeah.
And then, so I started out in the department and I was teaching mostly social psychology. Now, human sexuality, social psychology is a huge umbrella. And there is, a huge, there are many sex researchers out there, for example, Justin Lee Miller, who come from a social psychology background. So it's not that I don't want to suggest that my PhD was totally irrelevant, but it was not directly on sex. So what happened basically in a nutshell is that the professor who was teaching the class at the time, she fell 2 weeks before the start of the quarter and broke her leg. And the department was desperate to have somebody fill in because at the time the class had 300 students and they were like, oh my gosh, what do we do? And so I kind of raised my hand thinking, well, this could be good. I didn't have a permanent contract at that point. So it seemed like a great way to get started. And so I took it over and it was basically Lois, who was the previous instructor, downloading everything into my brain every night before the lecture. And it was so much fun. And then a year later, she retired and I took it over. And so at the time it was, a couple hundred students twice a year. And now it's grown to 1,200 students 3 times a year plus 400 over the summer. So it's 4,000 students a year. So
that is incredible.
It's really fun. Thank you.
I think, anyone who's taken a human sexuality course in college, I think knows how impactful those courses can be. I mean, when I went to the University of Texas at Austin and I was studying psychology, but I didn't really know what I wanted to focus on. And so I took a human sexuality course as an elective and I was like, this is it. I mean, it was so impactful. I learned so much. And I think by the end of my time at UT, I had taken all 3 of the human sexuality courses that the university offered. I
absolutely love that.
Yeah. And I think that, sex obviously drives so much of human behavior. It's such an important part of relationships. And I can definitely see how, coming from a social psychology background, there would be a natural interest in human sexuality because it's very social.
It's at the core of who we are, right? And exactly, it is very social. Yeah. And, I certainly did, work, even though I studied a lot on, relationships, and actually my thesis looked at, an element of motivation within relationships. But it is something that, it drives a lot of human behavior. And it is yet one of the things that we have very poor sex education in the US. And people are afraid to talk about it and people feel guilty about it. And people are, as a result, coming into sexual experiences with a lot of shame and not sort of this feeling that it's okay to be focused on things like pleasure and that it's important to have a healthy, robust sex life, unless you identify, of course, as somebody who doesn't want sex and just, they're all right. Asexuality is a beautiful umbrella. And, I'm not, what I'm saying now is not applying there, but it's just something that's at the form of who we are, and it just informs us, I think. And so so I love being able to be in a position where I can help people to kind of increase their pleasure and educate them so that I can get rid of that shame.
Totally. So let's talk about pleasure.
Yes.
So you've talked about the importance of assuming a holistic approach when it comes to helping people who struggle from different types of sexual problems. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by that?
Yes. So by a holistic approach, I'm not saying that I think you need to take vitamins and minerals and drink water and do deep breathing, although those things certainly can't hurt and are very good for your health overall. But really what I'm talking about is, we have, when we think of pleasure, right, we have to kind of address it from many different perspectives.
If you liked this video, drop me a like and subscribe below. Share with a friend who might find it interesting. You can also listen to this in podcast form anywhere podcasts are streamed by searching for Love and Libido with Dr. Emily Jamia. Finally, follow me across all social media channels at Dr. Emily Jamia for daily emotional and physical intimacy tips.